Welcome to the fourth section of Diving into Research, titled How to Conduct Responsible Research. I am so excited about this panel today because I want to learn how to start doing research at the university. I believe this will allow me to learn something new, challenge myself in different ways, and learn from my mistakes. This series aims to empower first-year graduate students, like myself, in gaining confidence to conduct research. As a reminder, please stay muted for the duration of the programming. This program is being recorded, and so please use video to your comfort level. You're welcome at any time of today's program to put your questions in the chat. If you are having any difficulties with Zoom, please message Delaine Anderson for assistance. It is my pleasure today to moderate our presentation with Marta Shore, a School of Public Health Biostatistics Lecturer, and Delaine Anderson, a second-year Maternal and Child Health Student. Before we get started, I would love our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Delaine. I use she, her pronouns. And as this lovely slide says, I am a second-year student in maternal and child health, working on my master's of public health. I'm pursuing the epidemiology and health services research policy and administration minors here. And at the U, I really have loved participating in research. I feel like it's really augmented my academic studies, and I'm really excited to share with you today that you can do it too.
Hi, my name is Marta Shore. I'm teaching faculty in biostatistics. Some of you may know me from such classes as Biostatistics 1. I teach in person. I don't think I'm the typical academic. I worked for a while before getting my master's degree in statistics. I taught undergraduates for a while, and then I went to work for the state. So I've done consulting, I've done teaching, I've worked in labs, and so I'm really grateful Delaine brought me here to talk about all my experiences working with data, finding data, using data. I think this will be a great conversation.
So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. As I said, I am a second-year student, and a lot of my experience with research has been what I call me-search. It's kind of a common term that we end up liking to study and look at things that are affecting our lives. Just a small plug, the previous session we had here, how to conduct responsible research, I dug a lot more into what it means to do research responsibly. But I also want to have the caveat that I think there's a real strong connotation of who is a researcher and who can do research. And I hope today you go away feeling more empowered that you can do it too. And the biggest part of that is I hope me talking about, I did this and I had no prior experience. In my undergraduate degree at the University of Alabama, I studied exercise science. And the only in I could find was in the nutrition lab, where I worked on rats and specifically helping to do what's called oral gavage and like put needles down their throats to give them like diet food, and then also collecting their blood. And so I had no experience with like talking to humans or doing research or doing software before I came to graduate school. Like that was like the highlight of my personal statement of like, I want to work with people. I do not want to work with rats my entire life, even though I have big hands and apparently somewhat good at it. So when I came to the university, I was like, all right, I'm ready. I want to dig in. I want to do research. And it was just a fun quirk of starting graduate school during a pandemic that professors were like, hey, none of us have funding, or none of us have a spot open, or we're not even allowed to do our research because of issues with people and space and quarantining. And so I was knocking what felt like at so many doors of, please take me, I have time, I have energy, I'm excited. And everyone was like, I'm so sorry, but we can't. And I kept hearing that over and over and over again. And for me, I want to become a rural physician. That's something that's really important to me, and it's part of why I'm here doing a graduate degree in public health. And I won't soapbox about that for too long today, but I wanted to get experience doing research because I know for my career path, fingers crossed, I want to be an advocate for my community. I wanted to be able to provide evidence to policymakers, both at the local and state level, about why we need resources. And part of that is playing kind of the policy game of providing good evidence. And so providing evidence comes in a way as part of research, right? It's finding out, it's quantifying something, it's saying this is something that's happening in this community, and perhaps these things are going to help address these issues. And so when I kept on knocking on doors saying, this is something I want to experience in, I want to work on a project, I want to do this, and not getting a way in, I was really dejected. And then I decided, you know what, I'm going to make this happen anyways. And when that conversation turned and my poor advisor got so many emails of, I'm trying to get in, I can't find this, I want to do this, and it's not happening. When I changed the conversation of, I think I'm going to do this on my own, I was able to get connected into so many resources. And it was the first time as a graduate student, I realized that if you have a passion and a vision, you can ask for help and you can make this happen. And so when I say make this happen, this is a screenshot from a conference video I did of me presenting my research. And I kind of want to show you the different things I've done. And I want to say that with the caveat of, this isn't special. I don't think there's something like intrinsic in my oatmeal that makes me a researcher and you not. I think it comes down to asking for help and getting skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about skills in a second, but I want to share, here's a link to the final secondary data analysis I did that's kind of talking about today's focus, quantitative data. I used what's called the American Community Survey data, and we can talk about that more in just a second, teaser, to quantify income disparities among Minnesotan women by ethnic background. And I did a lot of focus in disaggregating data, which I hope Marta may talk a little bit more about, that there's issues with how we talk about demographics, when we use race, when we use ethnicity, if we're not being intentional about what that means or what we're really trying to measure. And so hopefully if you poke through my website, you can see where I really break it down so people can see themselves within their data. And I want to say that all of that background and that training, that was by no means the final form. As you can see here, my quantitative study, this income disparity issue, I presented at 4 different conferences because my understanding of biostatistics and my understanding of how we talk about these issues changed. And I really want to share with you that there's, I think, never going to be a point where like, okay, I finally have enough training and I'm officially a researcher. You're going to continue to grow. And I try to share this a lot with people that like where I first started, like what I'm looking at is the mean. And if you're familiar with like really basic kind of mathematical ideas, like that itself isn't, groundbreaking biostatistics. There's important groundbreaking biostatistics, but the biggest thing, and I hope you take away from today, is that there are a lot of data available all over the internet, all over the world. And a lot of times it's not necessarily quantified in a meaningful way, such as pulling together this research that I did. This was information that was available, but we hadn't put it into an analysis and shared what this looked like yet. So today, again, is not supposed to replace actually taking biostatistics with Marta, because it is an awesome class and gave me the training to do this. But I want to say that you starting and having these conversations is what's really important. A small side note, I also participate in qualitative data. And I think a really important kind of stereotype to push against is that some people feel that qualitative data isn't as rigorous or as important as quantitative data. And that's just absolutely not true. They both have their place and they both do different purposes. And a great way, I think, to think of qualitative data, which can include focus groups and interviews and doing literature reviews, is to help provide nuance and details to something you might be seeing. I think the Maternal and Child Health, the Center for Maternal and Child Health Leadership Education here at the z.umn.edu has a qualitative mini lab that usually every couple of months they teach different types of qualitative skills. I can share that resource in just a moment in the chat, but it's something to definitely check out, because the biggest thing as you're here in grad school is that there are so many resources and so many things that you can get involved in and ask for people to share with you. In talking about all of this, some kind of takeaways of like how I did the thing is I did a few things. As I mentioned earlier, I found some people at the school and in my professional lives who I could bother. And I really do mean the word bother in that I lovingly would say, I need help with this. I don't quite understand this. And it's really important to recognize when you reach the like kind of boundary of what you know and what you don't know. You should never walk into the part you don't know and say you know what's going on. It's when you need to reach out and ask for someone else to look at it, whether that's a peer, whether that's a professor, whether that's your advisor. The greatest joy I've had in all of this, I'm currently the student primary investigator on an IRB study that's doing a qualitative research about body image and feelings regarding exercise in young women who are exposed to social media content around exercise, which is a huge whole mouthful. But the greatest joy of participating and leading that research as a student are my friends I brought with me. And these are my peers. They'll give me my permission to share our little photoshopped photos we have together that we call ourselves the Avengers. And we go through emails and we're working through, we did interviews over the summer. We wrote grants earlier in the spring and actually got funded to pay our participants. And we're getting to grow and do this together. And I think that's something like, even if you're not going to do research immediately after walking away from this, but in your classes, you know, I see like, I don't know how many of us are on here today, but we're all humans here and we love to connect and we want to grow. And hopefully we're all here because we believe in the power of research. And if you have an idea for something, don't feel like you have to go it alone. Ask a friend, be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? Or, hey, you know, do you mind looking at my code if you're in biostatistics and it's not for a homework assignment? Hey, can you, you know, like ask people, and more than likely, like people are going to just blossom and bloom. I mean, something I do after every conference I attend just as a participant is if I see someone's poster that I really like, I email them after the fact and say, hi, I really liked this. Do you have any resources or other documentation? And it's because of that email outreach, I'm helping someone like review their manuscript they wrote. This person lives on the other side of the country. And that just because I reached out, they're like, hey, are you interested in participating and helping me with my research? There's power in asking for help and reaching out and forming these connections. And it's in that same way that being involved in community helps keep you responsible. It helps you stay grounded with other people and to know like how you can potentially improve what you're doing or check in and just have feedback. I think that's something we're really afraid of in academia and research, of failing, right? We all want significant p-values. We all want to like make sure we're doing something groundbreaking, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It doesn't have to be this overwhelmingly huge, scary thing. It can be you and your 3 friends that you Photoshop onto Avengers saying, hey, we want to get this experience and we want to serve our community by providing something in return. So with that today, some resources we want to share. This is hot off the press. I am starting a public data source Google Doc that I am going and combing through the internet and all of the classes I've had when they share a public data source and putting it here. And I want this to become a living document. So I invite y'all to share it with your friends. If you have things that you know aren't on there, to let me know, and I want to add it, and I want this to keep living, because I think the biggest kind of like, oh my gosh, data is that there's a lot of data out there. And Marta is going to talk with us more about what to do with it. But research doesn't mean you need to create your own study and collect your own data. There are a lot of data sources that you can use to talk about issues without potentially burdening people to talk to you further. In addition to that, I'll also share a link both in the email after the fact of like my academic plan if you're interested in like, okay, what classes did this girl take? She sounds way too confident and I want to have some of that. Like kind of just see my tract and what I focused on. I'm going to share that with you. And again, it's the people around you of obviously obviously like Marta's here. And as a student, when I had her, I bothered her a lot to be like, what does this do? What does this mean? Like in a way, like you're here as a student, you're paying tuition dollars. And some of that is you have the right to ask your professors. And I wouldn't say, hey, I need you to check my entire SAS code output. But like, if you have questions about concepts or things, or like, how do you do this? Like, ask them. They'll either say, okay, I can't talk about that, or they'll like, here's a resource and here's a resource, because more often than not, people are excited about this and they're excited to share their life and their experiences with you. In addition to that as well, there's so many exciting classes at the U, but there's like literally only so much time you have and so many credits. And so something I utilize a lot, the UMN SPH syllabi website, you can look at courses and see what types of resources each class offers. Like when they're like, okay, these are required readings. By no means does that replace actually taking the class and engaging with it, but potentially if you want to get like a little exposure to like a topic or an idea, you could look at those and just be able to see, okay, when they are talking about this in this week, here are some potential resources that go along with that. And maybe I can take that to familiarize myself with it. Because the biggest part, and I think the hardest thing we sometimes face in like public health and in the professional world, is knowing when to recognize this is out of my element and I need help. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not comfortable doing that, or I don't think I have enough skills to work on this particular issue. No one's ever going to fault you for that. They'll fault you if you go too far the other way and you try to talk about something that's not actually there, which I think is a perfect segue for you, Marta, to talk about how you stay within your data sets. Again, if you have any questions about what I've talked about today, we're going to have a Q&A later. So feel free to throw things in the chat. We'll definitely get to them, but I will stop sharing. So Marta, you can.
Hi, everyone. Let me take a minute to get to my slides, get myself organized, get myself sharing my slides, and get started. Hold on. All right, so I wanted to talk today a little bit about just kind of finding secondary data sources, kind of things to look for, and kind of give you some perspective. I feel like there's a lot of data out there, but it doesn't mean it's super easy to access or it's in the form you need it. I also just wanted to echo what Delaine said. I worked on I think this is going to sound weird coming from a biostatistician, but I think qualitative research is extremely valuable. I've been part of groups where I have been able to highlight an issue, but the qualitative research in those interviews with those people most effective come up with the solutions. So I almost felt like, I have been a consultant for a few years on food insecurity at Hamline University, which is a local college, primarily college, little bit university, that has done a really good job recruiting first generation students, immigrant students, parents are immigrants or they are themselves are immigrants, students who have not had as much access to college, but they haven't done a great job on providing the resources they need. And there's a lot of food insecurity. One of the things I was able to do in this research was able to show that the non-cis binary students in particular were having a hard time accessing food. And we were able to look at a little bit of kind of what was related to that, but it wasn't until they did the one-on-one interviews with trans men, with trans women, with non-binary students, that they were able to kind of understand the issues and understand how they could help these people. So I just want to echo her on what Delaine said on they're both useful. But I'm going to talk about the quantitative. So What I'm really going to talk about is you're going to hear this term data cleaning a lot. And the reality is when you do research, and even when you're pulling a data resource that's already out there, you're going to spend a lot of time getting your data into the shape you need your data to be in order to analyze it. And a lot of people will call it data cleaning. And I'm not really fond of the term cleaning because it's not like you're getting rid of the messiness necessarily in terms of what the data says. You're getting the data into a form you can use it. Think of it as making sure your data is complete, making sure you have the data you need, making sure you have the specificity you need in the data. Do you need it by county? Do you need it by individual? Is that what the data you're getting, what information the data has? Making sure data is consistent. And that again is a lot of times you're going to be pulling from two different resources. Like I helped a student year before last who had information from the Minnesota Department of Health, but then she had environmental information from the Pollution Control Agency, and she wanted to unite it by county. How do we do that? How do we pull two data sets together? And then finally, you want to make sure your data is formatted correctly. One thing, I know several of you are currently in my class right now, and you're already like, Marta, we have to learn so much coding. And I'm like, but one thing I don't teach you is the fact that like, when I give you this data set, it's already set up in a format that R or SAS can read. And most of the time people don't have it in that format, especially if it's an Excel document. And I'll talk more about that later. Data cleaning is not removing outliers. Data cleaning is not getting rid of data that doesn't fit with your hypothesis. I think it's more important to kind of see what the data says instead of trying to find the data that fits what you think, right? That's just more ethical. Finally, data cleaning is not kind of subsetting the data unless there's a specific reason you need to do it. So for example, when I go to get data for Minnesota, I often go to the Department of Health and then they give me summaries and then they say, oh, you can go to this other site. And that turns out to be a national site. And then I have to subset it on Minnesota data, right? So that kind of subsetting is okay, but kind of, you know, being careful to respect the data as it is and try to preserve it as much as possible while still getting it into a form where you can pull together different data sources and format it in a way that your software can read it. So I see data cleaning as 4 steps. The first step is to examine your source. Where are you getting your data from? Is it trustworthy? Again, a lot of you are either in my class or will be taking it next spring. And I do a lot of like, is your data accurate kind of testing? This is the point where you're actually going to be doing it. You're actually going to be looking at these sources. And keep in mind, your source may be seen by some as accurate for some things, but not for others. For example, one thing I learned last spring is their state government often does not do a good job collaborating with various tribal nations in our state. And so their data is often not well done in terms of representing the tribal nations. So, and so it might be better to actually go to the source, go to the tribal nations themselves, or go to like the Indian Health Service to get your data. Examine your data. More than once I've been like, oh, I found the perfect source. And then I download it and it's a table of summary statistics. And I'm like, well, I can't do anything with that. I can't compare different variables because you've just summarized each variable. I can't get the raw data and compare them. Edit your data. Again, editing is not taking out data as much as getting it into a form where you can use it in software. And the most important thing I think is I really do encourage you to document any of your changes you make to your data. While both SAS and R have the capabilities to do a lot of data manipulation, that usually requires a higher level of programming. And between you and me, I often just do some stuff in Excel before I load it up into software. So I really do encourage you to keep track of your changes. I'm also a big proponent of saving multiple versions. We have the computing power to do that. And I really do think it is worth your while, because you may edit your data one way and then realize you need to go back to the original. And keeping that original copy with a reference to where you got it from is going to be critical for you to be able to do that reflection. So first thing is to examine your source. One thing I will say is public entities, whether it's the state government, federal government, or tribal governments, almost all of them, not almost, all of them do have data standards to ensure accuracy. They have data standards for collection of data, for formatting data, storing data, protecting data. So they're really trustworthy. However, when you go to those public entities, they are outward facing. So most of their data is summaries. Most of their data is the information people want to make policy or make decisions, or, they want to go to that COVID dashboard, right? They don't want to get the individual data. They want to go to the dashboard that summarizes it with a pretty picture. So to find the data you need, you may have to go through multiple sites, and you may need to register or file a data request. Don't be afraid to do either of those things. And I do encourage you to use your UMN email when you do it. I from personal experience, I've done my Gmail account and they're like, okay, but then the UMN, they're like, oh, wait, this is a researcher, which is a little frustrating. But at the same time, I think it's a really useful thing to know. Use your University of Minnesota account. It's okay to file a data request. There is something called the Freedom of Information Act that gives you the authority to ask for any data you want. When I worked for the state, I had FOIA requests asking for all my emails. So you can definitely get data. There's a trend in academia, a trend in general about like making data available. But there's also, whether they're an academic, whether they're an institution, or whether there's a nonprofit, there's power in data. So a lot of them have the desire to be public, but it may be hard to kind of pull the full information out. And I want to kind of show you some examples of public entities and academic and or institutional or nonprofit, and kind of wrestling with trying to find the data you want. The other thing that's going on is there's just so much data in the world, and there's this real push for academic journals for people to publish their data so it can be validated by others, right? So that we don't publish things that are not accurate. But I don't think people have, I think the people who are handling the data understand this, but I'm not sure that the people like at the editors of journals recognize how much work it is to manage that data and keep that data and standards for that data, right? I'm gonna spend some time in the Harvard Dataverse, which is actually a great resource, but it's also super, super frustrating from this perspective is there people are required to put their data in the Harvard Dataverse, and very often they load it up just as they used it, right? So do keep that in mind as you're going through. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing and share my, share some sites that I kind of wanna talk about navigating. So one site that's, sorry, I'm like had already looked some stuff up. One site that I think is a useful place to start, but can somewhat be frustrating, is healthdata.gov. Healthdata.gov is done by the US government, and it is a compilation of federal data and some state data, but there's no consistent, like all states have to put all data here, right? So, and then they have 3 ways that you can access data. And this is something that I find I wanted to demonstrate this because this is something I find when I look for data that I find very interesting, is that, you know, there'll be this link. Oh, here's the public data hub. This is great. This sounds exactly like what I want. And then you scroll down and it's like graphs and dashboards and all sorts of great resources if you want to find information, but it's not great resources if you want to get that raw data and actually analyze it yourself. So this is what I find happens to me a lot, is they're really, these sites are less about, they're more about communicating data and less about letting you see the raw data. So you really are going to have to dig a little bit. Recent data sets is a good place to go. I always look for something that says data sets itself. And then I do try to use search buttons. And again, it's like any search button. It depends on how people tag things. So like I tried food insecurity because that's something, you know, that's been something I've consulted on for a while. And so I'm always very interested in it. And I'm like, oh, wow, these look really great. And then it says state. And then we realize it's California. So if I want to do research on it, I'm going to, and for Minnesota, this isn't really going to be very helpful. Another search I did here was lead. And so I was like, oh, here, I mean, this is New York State, but here's lead testing in school drinking water buildings with lead-free plumbing compliance year 2016. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Let me look at what's going on with this data. So it will often pop up. You will have different ways to access the data. One thing I always look for is the data dictionary. Again, if you're in my class, you know I give this to you, but it's really critical with this data set, these data sets, because again, very often they're labels that are created. This is from New York, and they actually did a pretty good job labeling their data and formatting their data. But a lot of times the organization will use codes for the names and codes for the entries. And so it's really good to have a data dictionary. So this is this data set. It tells you the school district, it tells you the school, it tells you the county.
Apologies, Marta, we don't see the data set.
Oh, you don't? Okay. Sorry about that. Let me share. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
So I was super excited to find this data set because I'm like, wow, this would be really interesting. Even if it's summaries by school and it's an average, this could be very informative. They've got all this great stuff here about county, school district. You could do all sorts of work here, address, state, zip, and update. And we realize they don't actually have any data about lead. It just tells you where the schools are. So be prepared for that. Let me go back to my search. So I think it's a little easier instead of going through these big health data. I appreciate what they're trying to do here. I appreciate what the government's trying to do here by offering this kind of general site where you can go and you can do a search and you can look for different data sets. But I end up finding it very frustrating because I do feel like you just don't know what you're getting, right? You don't know if it's going to be applicable to what you're doing. So I do encourage you to start at, if you want to work with the state of Minnesota, start at the Department of Health. If you want to work on national, maybe start at the CDC or the FDA. Whether you're starting state or federal, you're going to notice that when you go to the site again, it's going to have a lot of offerings. And you're going to really need to click on the one that's data, statistics, and legislation. And then you're going to have to realize, like, when you go through again, we're seeing some really interesting stuff. Here's lead again. This is really important. And it said it was about data, but it's just really talking about all this information about it. And so and then there's a couple summary tables. So one thing you're going to find when you're looking for data is often the first thing you're going to find are summary tables, which are useful for kind of getting an overall sense. But again, that's not what you want. You want the raw data. You want to understand at a either like a city or county or state or even individual level. So what you're going to need to do, and I always find this very frustrating, is I find it very hard to go through the federal government to get Minnesota data. But then when I go to Minnesota, I'm almost always going to have to click and get to federal data. And then when you get to federal data, you can, the state's getting you to the federal website you need, and then the federal website will give you the data that you want. Another thing I do want to point out is in the state of Minnesota, there's all these things about data, interactive data sources, data. But this is where I find data, what I think of as data, which is the individual measurements, right? What the federal government and state government very often labels as data is actually summaries of data. This page actually, I think, is probably the most useful for you as there's the general statistics, there's the vital statistics, there's all sorts of, the surveys are actually incredibly powerful. The behavioral risk factor surveillance survey is an amazing federal survey where they collect a ton of data on your health and on your activities. The Minnesota Student Survey is actually a really good survey as well. It's something like 83% of schools in Minnesota participate, and then students, they do a very good job making it very clear to students that you should, it's confidential, please give information, please answer truthfully. And so I do encourage you to, you are gonna have to dig, but when you get to these surveys, they're really, really great. So here's the behavioral risk factor surveillance system. This is one of the kind of the nicest, the best surveys out there. When you click through, you're gonna again have to click through a lot of pages. To try to find the data itself. Here is the actual survey data. And even then, when you get into here, the downside of getting the raw data is it's humongous. So again, if I was interested in Minnesota, it brings me here. I can view the data. And then I'm going to filter it. I can filter it to be just about Minnesota. So I could do just 2020. I could add a new filter condition, or I can get Minnesota data. Because if I download this whole data set, it's going to take hours. So, yeah, so that's how I find good data. That's how I find federal data, state data. Another resource is that's out there that I was talking about is this Harvard Dataverse. This is a great place to find. So a lot of articles have to publish their data and make it public. And if you click on medicine, life, and health sciences, you can go to that data. This is, again, it's going to take a lot of time to kind of sort through things, because basically what they do is they just post it when it comes in. So here it is. And you can look at the titles. And here's the thing. I was looking at this morning and I thought this. There's not a ton of standards here. I mean, Harvard Dataverse does its best. Harvard has enough money to make sure that this has features which actually makes it pretty accessible compared to a lot of big data warehouses. But at the same time, people are just loading up their data. And so you're going to get data like that, or scripts. You're also going to get people who are required to load up their data and don't really get what the journal's asking for. Let's see if I can find it. Sorry, it's taking a minute. And they'll load up summary tables, or they'll load up heavily formatted Excel documents, and you're not going to really be able to work with it. So just keep that in mind. Allow yourself a lot of time to look for data. It can be frustrating as you're going through, but really take the time and look at it, look at what you're getting. See if I can find it. There was one I found this morning, which I was like, oh, this will be such a good example. And then I looked at it and was like, oh, no, here it is. So she has survey data for my research services of community pharmacists for pregnant and breastfeeding women in Jordan. I'm like, wow, that sounds like amazing data. I really appreciate you sharing your data with me. Oh my goodness, it's an Excel file. This is perfect. I don't have to worry about formatting. It has the button to download it. Oops, what did I do? I went to the meta, sorry. Let me go back. I can download it. Let me download it as an Excel spreadsheet. This is awesome. Let me open it up. This is completely and utterly valid. It's in Jordan, but I personally cannot use it. But this is entirely valid because this is the form this researcher needs the data in order to do their analysis. This is their language. So just, again, keep in mind that people are doing things in different ways in different countries and different organizations. And so it is going to take some time to dig through and find data that you can use. If you use one of these Dataverses, if you use Kaggle, if you use any of these other sources, it is highly dependent on the person loading up the data. They do provide search engines. They do provide views of the data. You can download it. It's really accessible. But again, keeping in mind, you really need to look at your source. You really need to look at your data and think about it. And you're going to have to do some digging for that data. All right, next slide. So the next thing you need to do is examine your data. Sometimes data will be in a SAS or R format. Most often it's in a CSV. CSV is my preferred one. Keep in mind that you might need a data dictionary. In fact, you probably will need a data dictionary. Look for data that has data dictionaries. If it's in CSV format, if it's from the government and they give it to you in a CSV format, chances are it was actually pulled out of SAS. SAS doesn't require, but SAS encourages names to be no more than 8 characters, no spaces. Also, very often they will use numbers instead of category names. It's just easier to enter the data that way. But that means you're going to have to spend some time translating the data when you're analyzing it. A lot of times, especially in the Harvard Dataverse, they will load it up in the tab format. CSV stands for comma separated values. That means the row is an individual in the study, whether the individual is a person or a county or an organization or whatever it is. And CSV means each variable values separated by a comma. Tab means each variable value separated by a tab. CSV and tab formats are going to be the most common formats that people share because they're just, you can access them in all sorts of different software. But just keep in mind that your computer may not know what to do with it. So download it, save it, go into Excel, open it. Usually Excel can figure out what the tab format means, and then you can translate it and save it as CSV to load into your software. I do that instead of trying to load tab formatted or other formatted software directly into my into R or SAS. R and SAS have come a long way in that you can specify other types of data. In R, if you use RStudio and you go to the import data, you can click and you can choose Excel file. There's also packages where you can load SAS files or SPSS files. And in SAS, we talk about kind of the data. I think it's a data file equals CSV. You can change that to tabs. So there's ways you can get it in directly. I personally like to take it through Excel and just give it a once over, make sure it's formatted properly before I load it up. If you download something that's Excel format, chances are it's that form because they wanted to preserve tables they made or they wanted to preserve formatting they made. There was one I looked at today where they had information by state. I think it was on lead levels. They had information by state, and then they had headings, which were rows that was like region of the country, which made it look really pretty and easy to understand, but it's not in a form that you can load into software. So you do need to examine it, and I encourage you to examine it before you put it into your software, because you're going to see all sorts of little formatting things like that. You also might want to edit your data. If it's in a SAS or CSV format, you might want to use the data dictionary to find the variables you want. It's certainly going to make your analysis a lot easier. Again, a lot of you have taken Biostat 1 with me, and you know that that lung health study data set has like 80 variables in it, and you need 5 of them. Often it's just easier to just load in the 5 variables, to be honest with you. I often get the big data set, like the behavioral health one I was talking about that has 270 columns. I go and look at the data dictionary, select the ones I need, just load those in. You will notice if it's in a CSV format, there's probably the names are not apparent. Again, SAS prefers 8 characters, so they'll often come up with some sort of coding for even the variable name. R does not allow spaces. So it's really important to have the data dictionary. In Excel, it's less important because it will allow you to, to do columns with spacing and things like that. But you're going to probably have to do some formatting fixing to load it into SAS to make those labels smaller, to eliminate the spaces for R. Both of them have become a little more flexible working with data, but they're still not great. Again, with Excel formatting, people love to do color code certain cells, and they love to put subtitles, and they love to put a graph at the top and then the data, and that's gorgeous, but that is not the least bit useful. So you're going to have to do some editing, and that's the kind of editing I feel is totally okay. Getting the data in a form where your software can read it is totally fine. I'm coming up on my time. Finally, document all your changes. In SAS and R, use that commenting to note any changes that you do to your data in the software. In Excel, I usually make a separate little tab at the bottom, and I keep track of actually everything I've done. And again, it's really important because you may go present at a conference and then come back, and then someone says some really good idea you didn't think of, and you're like, oh, I want to do that. So then you come back and you're like, oh, wait, I took that variable out. Okay, where did I do that? I include you to save the copies, like save as. I'm constantly, like if you ever see my syllabus, it's like syllabus, and then there's the date, because I've actually saved 10 copies of the syllabus, right? I save over and over and over again. I think you should do the same for your data, because again, you might need to go back to that previous version. Consider control process options like GitHub. Now, this is, again, something that it takes a little bit of work to use, but one thing that's really nice is the University of Minnesota has its own GitHub repository. You can sign in with your login, and you can set up folders. GitHub, like any computer thing, they've made up their own language that makes no sense outside of GitHub. So sometimes you have to take a little bit of getting used to it to get in. But they do give you a guide. And what's really nice is you can kind of just save. This was an assignment where people had to learn how to use GitHub, but you can save updates. You can people can edit it if you're working with collaborators. It takes a little, like any computer thing, it has its own language, and it takes a little while to kind of get the lingo down, but it's actually a really useful resource, especially if you're collaborating with people. People even put like just abstracts and text documents in there because you can suggest changes and you keep track of the changes. And it's just a little bit easier to access than even like a Google Doc. So I do encourage you to look into that as well, to keep track of those changes. All right. Sorry to go over.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Like, I just kept writing, like, I've learned quite a lot. Like, here's my book. Like, I just want to appreciate you for taking your time to be with us today and to teach us about research. And just my reflection, like, I found this very informative. You make research very exciting and so easy to conduct. And I just feel so confident right now. And I feel so energized, and I just feel like I can do this. Thank you so much for that, for motivating us. And now I feel like I can conduct secondary data analysis. I now understand what it means, the word clean data, which involves making data complete, consistent, and formatted correctly. I really like this quote that this quote you made. See what the data says rather than find a data that fits what I think. That really stuck with me. Thank you so much for that. And I know that I understand how to examine the source and examine data and edit my data, and also the importance of having a data dictionary, and also keeping track of everything I do while I'm conducting my research, and also to use my UMN email. I never thought of how important it is to, use that, and you made it very clear to us how much it can make it easy for us to get information without stress. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And we're just going to move straight up to our Q&A. And I also want to appreciate Delaine. It's actually a great honor to have you on here, to share your experience with us, especially for us that, for us that we're first year, we're just very new with research, and just having someone like a peer, someone that has gone through what we're about to go through, and hearing those words from you is very encouraging. I really appreciate you taking your time to be with us here. And you said something that actually stuck with me, because like I said, I was just taking note of everything. All we need is the passion and the vision, and that's enough to make it happen. And also to make use of the resources we have around us, reach out to the professors, reach out to our peers, not just for us not to be afraid to reach out, basically. All right, so let's dive into our Q&A section. We have lots of questions here for our panelists. So I'll go with the first question here. Would large data of that size from BRFSS survey be downloadable to put into SAS or on demand? I think that question goes to Marta.
Yeah, I have not tried to load something that big into SAS on demand. SAS on demand is basically, it's designed as more of a teaching tool. I will say, if you are in the School of Public Health, you can request SAS to be downloaded onto your computer. It's rather large, but it can handle those large data sets as well. If you are not in School of Public Health, through the Office of Information Technology, you can get a 1-year license to the software to download onto your computer for, like, I think it's under $50, which is, I don't know, like 1/25 the cost of it. Out on I mean, it's thousands and thousands of dollars to own it, like outside of the university. So for sure, take advantage of those. If you are wanting to do research outside of class, I think moving from SAS on demand to getting kind of SAS on your computer is the way to go. Just so that you can have those data sets in there. You're going to have to kind of relearn a little bit how to get the data into SAS, but it's just SAS on demand. It's up in the cloud, and I think they're not super happy. They wouldn't be super happy to have 2 million lines of data uploaded into your personal file.
Thank you so much, Marta. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question here. You also mentioned filing a data request. What does that look like in real time, the process and paperwork?
So usually FOIA, so there's 2 types of requests you're going to end up doing. One of them is just kind of like, you have to put your name in and you're trying to get public data. And usually that doesn't take very long. It's usually they're just trying to make sure you're a real person kind of thing. But if it's a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, usually it's a little more work. Most public organizations are going to have people who handle those requests. So it shouldn't be like a ton of paperwork, but very often they have 30 or 60 days to get it back to you. So usually the paperwork is not bad, not too confusing, but you do have to kind of have this like apply now kind of attitude if you want to have the data for spring, because they do sometimes need time to pull it together.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And then we'll move on to the next question. What are other sites that are similar to Harvard Dataverse?
So the big one I know about is called Kaggle.com. There are a few other sites, but I can't think of them off of the top of my head. I know for a lot of researchers, Harvard Dataverse is usually where they upload it. Sometimes some sites, I think so there's PLOS, which is an online journal, and I think they require you to upload your data to them directly. So you can also kind of head out to those sources and see where they have their people upload their data who publish in the journal.
And I was going to say, I shared one earlier. The U has a data repository called Drum, and most larger institutions have one. So you can really just like Google data repository with maybe what you're looking for, or like look at different schools. I know at the U, if you're interested, you can actually like request a meeting with a librarian and say, hi, this is what I want to research. does the repository have data that already has this and can talk to it? And so that's, again, kind of a save resources. If someone already has done a similar perhaps study to what you're looking at, but hasn't done that analysis yet, you might be able to request and use their data and do the same type of analysis. So, UMass shared one in the chat saying the online repository of demographic health surveys too, and shared the link. We'll definitely include that in the post program email.
Thank you so much. And then our final question for today. Some data sets have their own analysis tools. Do you ever use those or always aim to download an entire data set?
I will sometimes use filters. Those tools are actually very useful. I don't know how to put this nicely. I'm a little bit of a control freak. I want to have kind of the raw data. That's just kind of how my brain works. So, but a lot of those is, again, especially like trustworthy nonprofits, public sites, or public institutions. Those tools are there to make it accessible, and they are really useful. I like to have the raw data.
And I can echo that. I think they can serve specific purposes. If you're ever looking for like kind of a quick statistic or a quick kind of, I want to report on this that like is represented in that kind of tool, great. But if you ever need to kind of break it down further, I think that's where you would want to download and then relook at it. I think it kind of depends on the question you want to answer. And if it's something that, you know, you just need to know the percentage of birthing people in Minnesota who breastfed last year, then you can, you know, get that quick thing. But if you needed to do some more, you know, crazy cross analyses by education, by poverty, by other things, you'd want perhaps a larger data. Because I've had issues sometimes with those tools. If you try to add in too many variables, it just, you can sense the system getting overwhelmed. So.
Okay, thank you so much. If you all don't mind, this will be the very last question, okay? So hold on, please. So let's get the last question out. How do you translate your results into communication for your communities?
So this is the number one thing, and this is actually something I'm really passionate about in my field, is honestly, like, as a woman, I'm one of these people who, like, you know, when I have to write an important email, I email 5 of my friends first. And I do think that is actually a really useful tool for that eventual communication, is right. Like, talk to your colleagues about it. Then maybe talk to someone that you know from your class who's not your field, and really refine your language. The more you talk about it, the more you explain your results, the clearer they will be. And the more you try to explain them to other people, the more accessible you make them. So it's hard. It's hard to step out there, and especially if you're new to research and you don't, like, I was very much that person who was very afraid to talk about my research at first, because I didn't want to embarrass myself by saying something that was wrong or made me look stupid. But then I realized that the only way I get to the point where I can communicate an idea is just trying to communicate it over and over again. Start small with the people you know are going to love you, right? And then go from there. And it really, I feel like communication happens when you go through multiple times of trying to explain it. There's this really great Albert Einstein quote, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so for me, the process of explaining it to multiple people gets me to the point where I understand it well enough that I can say it simply.
And I'm here to definitely echo that I think the kind of biggest myth I hope we've busted today is that research is scary and hard to understand. Like the research I did, and I'm very proud of, talking about income differences, is just the mean on a really big level. And like that concept in and to itself is not earth-shattering biostatistics, but it still matters to talk about it because that issue is real and it's a prevalent problem. Money affects your health and how much you can spend on things you need. And I think something I've tried to do in practicing, like when I'm practicing and doing research, is how does this go back to serve my community? How do I share this information? And very often that's not an academic manuscript. It's something with the other work that we're doing, that we're planning to create some fact sheets. We're working with reaching out to like community organizations of, when we finalize this, can we share it with you so you can share it with other people and share it with people who are affected by these issues? And it's kind of stepping out of the academic hat of, this is, I do research and I publish it, and then I do research and I publish it, and pushing out of that space of, no, research can serve anybody. I feel really lucky. I'm a graduate research assistant with the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. And like my research assistantship is working for a rural nonprofit and helping them conduct research and create good evidence when they talk about funding opportunities. And it's phenomenal. I'd be happy to talk about it if anyone else is interested. Again, I've put my email in the chat many times and we'll share them again soon, but it's taking a step back and thinking about, when I, find out whatever my result is, how do I put this in a way that it's going to serve the community I'm talking about? And that's not always a manuscript.
And the other thing I would say is, when you reach out to that community organization, you can also be like, hey, can I talk to you about my results? And how can I make this better? How would this be better? How would this be easier for you to understand? Don't be afraid. I mean, like, they want that information too. And so if you come and you're like, here's what I have, does this make sense? And then they're like, well, then and very often they want the information, so they're going to help you get there.
Thank you so much, Marta and Delaine, for that explanation. For me personally, I always have that, inner fear to just share my thoughts or share whatever I'm thinking. And, you've made it easy for me to really understand that people are always receptive to, to know what I'm thinking, and I shouldn't be afraid to share whatever I'm working on. And I really love this second quote you gave us, which is, if you can't explain it, then it means you don't understand it well enough. So yeah, thank you so much, Marta, for that. So thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to our panelists, Delaine and Marta. Thank you so much. We appreciate all your contributions. If you have any questions we didn't get to answer, please send us an email with your questions at sphmchig@umn.edu. And we will try our best to answer them. As a reminder, this panel today is a part of our Diving into Research series. Our next section will be in December. This programming is led by the Maternal and Child Health Interest Group at the University of Minnesota. Thanks once again, and we hope to see you in December.